Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People's Story. As a resident of a close-knit rural community, I had always cherished the bonds forged with my neighbors. The recent passing of my dear old neighbor, a kind-hearted man who had lived his whole life on his ancestral land, left a void in my heart. Months passed, and his property remained abandoned, awaiting new occupants. Little did I know that the arrival of the new neighbors would unravel a sinister plot, shattering the peace that once enveloped our idyllic neighborhood. The newcomers seemed peculiar from the moment they settled in. However, it wasn't until later that I discovered they were brazen squatters, illegally occupying the vacant land without paying rent or acquiring a mortgage. The realization deepened my disdain for them. Their audacity reached new heights when they callously demolished the historic wooden house that had stood as a testament to the old man's legacy. Instead of rebuilding it on the same spot, they encroached upon my own property, fueling my growing unease. Their next audacious move was constructing a road from the main thoroughfare to their new dwelling. Traditionally, our rural area had no defined roads, only well-worn paths created through usage. However, as I observed their construction efforts, it became clear that most of the road was encroaching onto my land. Despite the vast available space, they intentionally invaded my property, exacerbating my bewilderment. It was at this point that a revelation struck me. Having dedicated some of my limited free time to researching squatter issues, I had come across numerous stories about their deprived quality of life, without access to basic amenities such as electricity and gas. Curiously, my new neighbors had managed to enjoy the comfort of electricity. My suspicions were confirmed one fateful night when I stumbled upon a hidden extension cord snaking beneath layers of dirt, their road and more dirt until it reached their illicitly occupied house. They had been siphoning electricity from my supply, leeching off me without my knowledge. Anger coursed through my veins, urging me to confront them head-on. However, I knew a more strategic approach would yield better results. Firstly, I swiftly disconnected their power supply and installed an outlet cover with a lock, effectively cutting off their stolen electricity. But I wasn't content with mere revenge. I delved deeper into my research, reaching out to various town departments responsible for addressing illegal construction and encroachment issues. I meticulously gathered evidence knowing that the absence of property ownership and legitimate permits would expose their web of deceit. During my absence from the neighborhood, officials paid the new neighbors a visit, unearthing a laundry list of violations. They were arrested on the spot and subsequently granted a court date. I attended one of the hearings to provide crucial testimony, emphasizing the encroachment of their road onto my property and the destruction they had wrought after the old man's passing. The financial burden imposed on them far exceeded their means, and the town authorities were left with no choice but to demolish their illegal house and road, incurring additional expenses. As fate would have it, there was an unexpected twist in this tale. The squatters had entered Poland as mere visitors, lacking any legal status to reside or purchase property. Their unlawful occupation had ultimately sealed their own fate. Instead of facing jail time, they were deported back to their home country, forever marked by their transgressions. Their dreams of making a new life in our community were shattered, tarnished by the chaos they had sown while attempting to fly under the radar. Reflecting on the dramatic turn of events, I couldn't help but find a glimmer of satisfaction. These unscrupulous individuals, driven by greed and deceit, had unwittingly orchestrated their own demise. Their actions had ensured they would never be able to return to our country, forever haunted by their records. The incident served as a stark reminder of the importance of community vigilance and upholding the values that bind us together. As for me, I reveled in the knowledge that justice had prevailed, and our harmonious neighborhood could once again thrive, free from the clutches of those who sought to exploit its tranquility. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Well, let's start a few years in the past. My great-grandparents planted an orchard. It is now at least 120 years old. My grandparents and my parents were really proud of the peach trees growing in it, and did their best to keep them in good health. We always threw a big party when the peaches were ready to be harvested and invited all of our friends and neighbors to it. I loved those parties. The neighbors on the property to the south of our orchard were particularly fond of our peaches. They were a bunch of fine old people, and the old man, Sam, and I were pretty good friends. He taught me a lot about woodworking with hand tools only, and we had some great evenings in his workshop. We finished many good whiskeys in there together, In return, he got a lot of fine peaches, marmalade, homemade peach liqueur, etc. Sadly, he died a good 10 years ago. Cancer is a real a-hole. His wife followed soon after. Many suspected it was of a broken heart. They had no kids, so all of their property was left to the state, except his tools and whiskey collection, which he had gifted me a few weeks before he died. Enter Karen. The name speaks for itself. Haircut, attitude, idiotiness, the whole deal. She bought the property of my late neighbors. We hadn't had the kind of money to buy it at that time, as we had encountered some dire straits in the years before, and all our savings were gone. The first thing she did, before she actually moved in, was to go around and make demands of the neighbors on the surrounding properties. When it was finally our turn to listen to her gibberish, she told us that we needed to remove half of the trees, as the leaves were blowing onto her property. We told her politely that we wouldn't comply with her demands, since the orchard is a vital part of our family heritage, tradition, and life, and it has been there for at least 120 years. She was pretty pissed, but did nothing for the time being. There are some things you need to know before I continue with the story. The workshop I mentioned before was situated right at the border of our property. It was a small, timber-framed building, at least 160 to 180 years old. The regulations in my state are pretty strict concerning old structures. Every structure over 100 years is protected, and you need special permission to tear it down. Failing to get this permission can lead to a hefty fine. To get permission to build a new building, it has to be up to code, and you have to ask your surrounding neighbors. If they agree, you're good to go. Except there is one specialty in my county. You have to keep a certain distance from the border of the property to allow emergency services full access to your property. If one of these requirements isn't met, the building is illegal, or at least only partially legal, and can actually be ordered by the court to be torn down. That might come in handy later. So back to my Karen. After our first encounter with her, she did her best to pester the whole neighborhood. She got the neighbor's dog put down because he allegedly attacked her brat. It later turned out she faked the attack. The dog was the sweetest and most innocent dog you could imagine. A Bernese mountain dog, big but a real teddy bear. Anyways, she later got us to stop doing our annual peach parties, as she called the police every time for various reasons. Noise complaints, we had a band playing there in the afternoon. Arson, we lit a fire in a designated fire pit in the middle of our property. She called the ATF on us, allegedly making moonshine. My dad had a license to distill for our own consumption. In short, she was a real pain in the bum, and after 3 years, we decided it wasn't worth it to deal with various officers and law enforcement agencies every time we threw the party, and we decided to quit. After she had reached this goal, she resorted to pestering us to remove the orchard. We didn't cave in, and some things started to get really fishy. Somehow the tires of our trucks got slashed, eggs got thrown on our farmhouse, our cat disappeared and surfaced a few days later in pretty rough condition. It looked like somebody had tried to cut his tail off. Don't worry, he healed up completely, but we actually couldn't prove that she did all that. Then came the day she made her biggest mistake. She had a company come in for a sort of secret operation and tear down the old woodworking workshop overnight. 2 days later, they started building a big garage recreational center/house right where the shop was. But she missed one fine detail that got pretty important later on. She didn't ask for our permission, nor for the neighbors. A short while after, the trees right next to her property started to get sick. The leaves turned brown in the middle of summer, and the branches started to die. We lost 4 trees before we figured out the cause. Somebody had driven long copper nails into them. We had a suspicion, but we couldn't prove it, so we put up some trail cameras. Perfectly legal, as it was on our own property. We caught her red-handed. My dad confronted her. She apologized, and my dad, being the way too nice guy he is, wanted to let her off the hook, but not me. The nail she drove into our oldest tree was the final nail in her coffin. I started to investigate. I had some friends at the administration of our county and asked them to do some inquiries. It turned out she hadn't applied for permission to tear down the old shop or to build a new building. I further did some inquiries on the borderline of our property. It turned out the old markers vanished over time, and her building was about 3 feet on our property. After I had gathered all this information, I presented it to my parents. At first, they were reluctant as they didn't want to start a neighborhood clash. But after I recalled all the things she did to us and our neighbors, they were in. So let the games begin. First, we called the authorities on her for tearing down a protected building and presented them with all the evidence we gathered. Then we called the building authorities on her for building a structure without permission, not up to code. And not only did she not keep the required distance to the property border, she also built on our property without our permission. Long story short, it turned out the workshop hadn't only been protected because of its age, but also because it was a historical landmark that played a vital role in a conflict back in the 1860s. She got sued for this and had to pay a fine of an equivalent of about $150,000. She further had to demolish her newly built building, costing an additional $50,000. She got fined for this too, about $83,000, and had to rebuild the workshop at her own expense, which was another whopping $154,000, as it had to be period correct down to the smallest detail. It means it had to be built with the correct materials, with hand tools only, and to the correct dimensions. As you can imagine, paying professionals to build quite a large timber-framed building only by hand gets pretty expensive pretty fast. So all in all, it cost her an equivalent of $437,000 plus further expenses for lawyers, etc. This caused her to go bankrupt, so she had to sell the property in the end, which my parents bought, by the way. The last I heard of her was that she moved back to the big city. The next one is a petty revenge story. I can't take credit for this one. My uncle is a 76-year-old veteran and still sharp as a tack. He's quite the character and always cracks me up with his stories. As some of you may remember, early in the pandemic when no one really knew how COVID was spreading, the only stores open were supermarkets. They essentially made every aisle a one-way only in that everyone was supposed to go in the same direction. So up one aisle and down the next. The problem is, if you forgot an item and went back, you risk going in the wrong direction to retrieve it or having to go down the aisle next to it just to come back up. I remember a lot of people not really observing these signs as it was kind of absurd. Most supermarkets at the time were also offering special hours for seniors so they could shop in a less crowded store, usually at 7-8 a.m. My aunt and uncle went grocery shopping during this hour. One day, while waiting in line to pay, my aunt realized she forgot an item and asked my uncle to go retrieve it. But when he got to the aisle, he was facing the wrong direction. Seeing as though there was only one other person in the aisle, he went down it in the wrong direction rather than having to go down the aisle next to it, only to come back up. But as he started making his way down the aisle, a Karen, clearly not a senior, entered with her cart from the other end of the aisle, going in the right direction. She started making her way towards my uncle, and when she got 5 feet away, loudly said, "You were going in the wrong direction." My uncle, who was looking for his item on the shelf, was startled and turned around. "What?" Karen, even louder this time, said, "You're going the wrong way." My uncle took a moment to reflect and replied, "You know what? You're right. My parole officer told me the same thing. He said, 'Eddie, you've been going the wrong way your whole life. When I was in prison—'" Karen's eyes grew wide, and she couldn't get away from him fast enough. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Traditionally, German universities handed out degrees called Diplom for engineers and natural scientists, and Magister for humanities. In the early 2000s, all the universities had to adapt to the bachelor-master system to make degrees internationally comparable. The main difference between the two systems is that in the old Magister system, there was no compulsory attendance and no tests. You just participated as you saw fit, and at the end of a semester, you would get a slip of paper for each course you took. Once you had collected enough paper slips, you could take an exam, and at the end you would write a thesis. In the new system, there was compulsory attendance, and every course needed to be graded because all the grades went into your final grade. That, of course, meant a lot more work for the professors as they had to grade dissertations or exams for every class they taught. This was a huge inconvenience to them because in Germany, teaching and research are not separated. As a professor, you are expected to do both. And every minute you spend on teaching cannot be used to do research, write, and publish articles, and thus secure funding for your research. I happened to be in the first cohort to study under the new system at my university. There was one professor in particular who voiced his disapproval very adamantly. He taught German linguistics. In his first lesson of the semester, he told us about compulsory attendance. He then said, "I'll leave the attendance sheet on my desk right here. I'll also inform you that I will have a 5-minute smoking toilet break in the middle of my lesson where I will leave the room. As this is a very big classroom, I can, of course, not remember all of your faces and/or handwriting. So I guess I'll have to trust that none of you would, I don't know, just come in during the break, sign the sheet for yourself and everyone you know, and leave." His class was genuinely interesting, though, so a lot of us went anyway. but it was nice to know he was on our side. In the last lesson before the exam, he said, "Do not study for this exam. I mean it. The difficulty level of the exam is lower than low. Don't waste your time." Of course, no one believed him, and everyone studied nevertheless. The next one is an entitled people story. So my daughter, we'll call her T, came over to the house to do some laundry, and she was asking, "What the hell is Aunt Liz's problem?" I asked what she meant, and she explained how my sister had posted on Facebook that she and her husband were going away for their 15th wedding anniversary. T said that she had sent Aunt Liz a congrats post, and Liz responded back with very ducking funny. So I sat her down and told her what I'm about to tell you. When T was 4, Liz had called us and said that she was getting married in a few months. She and I were doing the typical girly squee sounds and "oh, that's wonderful" stuff that sisters usually do. When we calmed down, she asked if T would be willing to be the flower girl. I asked her and she said yes and chanted, "I'm gonna be a flower girl," and started running around and pretending to fly like she was a new member of the Justice League or something. I told Liz, "We need to work on it," but she's in. About a month later, the invites came in. In them, it was stated that Liz did not want any children under the age of 17 there and explained why. The reasons were sound: bored children, potential disruptions, etc. So I understood them. I did, however, have one concern. I called her and asked, "Hey, just got the invites. Me and the boys will be there, but Hubs has a business trip that month and can't make it. Do you still want T as your flower girl?" Liz replied, "Oh God, yes. She's too cute to not have her." I shrugged and said, "Well, it'll be the 4 of us. Consider this your RSVP." She said, "Great, see you there." We hung up and I went online and made the reservations. A room for me and T and an adjoining room for the boys, Ron, 19, and Carl, 17. Names changed and all that. Fast forward to the weekend of the wedding. The venue is a 6-hour drive for me, and I had to get out there on a Friday for the Saturday wedding. Since I had to wait for Carl to get out of school, we got a late start on Friday, and we got there around 10 p.m. I got out and checked into the hotel room, and I texted Liz. They were still at the venue and would be there at least another hour or two taking care of details, so we drove over. We got there, and it was the usual pre-wedding chaos. Liz was getting things to her liking and honestly going a bit bridezilla. She saw us first, beamed, and came over. However, when she got closer and saw who was in my party, she blew up. "Why did you bring her?" she screamed. I said, "But you wanted her for—" I was cut off, and Liz went into a complete screaming meltdown about how this was her day. She didn't want children there, and how dare you bring a child to my wedding, while looking right at T, and then stormed off screeching curses into the night. I was done. T was crying and saying, "But I wanted to be the flower girl," in between sobs, and Ron and Carl looked like they wanted to kill their aunt. And at that moment, I wasn't sure I wanted to stop them. I picked up T and tried to comfort her and herded the crew back to the car, and we drove back to the hotel. I was seriously considering just packing up the car and heading home. I told the boys that, and Ron was being the level-headed one. "Mom, it's a 6-hour drive, and we're all too tired and pissed to make that drive right now. We'd get in around 5, 6 in the morning, depending on rest stops and bathroom breaks. Do you really want to do that since we have a nice hotel room for the night? How about we go back to the hotel, get a night's sleep, and head back in the morning?" I grudgingly admitted that he had a point. Carl piped up, "Mom, I've got another idea." I was irritable, and I kinda snapped, "What is it?" Carl looked up from his phone and sheepishly said, "Well, T's pretty upset." Which was true. It's been 15 minutes, and she's still sobbing. "I want to be the flower girl," over and over in the back seat. Carl continued, "There's a county fair that just started tonight, carnival rides, petting zoo, games, that sort of thing." I snapped, "So?" Carl is made of sterner stuff. He didn't wither under my anger and continued, "We have the hotel until Sunday morning. Why not spend the night here, go to the fair tomorrow, and then go home on Sunday like we planned? Give T something to think about other than Aunt Liz's freakout, let her have some fun, and we all could use a mom and the gang outing right about now." I calmed down a bit and said, "An idea not without merit." I looked at T in the rear view and said, "What about it, T? You want to go to the fair instead of the wedding?" She sobbed. "I want to be the flower girl," Carl piped up. "They're going to have cotton candy and deep-fried Oreos." The crying stopped. There was one last sniffle, and an exhausted but determined, "I want to go to the fair." So that's what we did, and we had fun. Liz could have her bridezilla day, and that was that. Except that it wasn't. We had all turned our phones off since we knew some calls would be coming in, and we just could not be bothered to deal with it. When we got back to the hotel, my mom and dad were there. They lit into me about how T was supposed to be there as the flower girl, and we just blew my sister and her special day off. Mom, Dad, I said, you know how the invite said no children? I called Liz when we got ours, and I asked if she still wanted T as a flower girl. She said that she did. So I brought T to the venue last night, and Liz flipped out about how dare I bring a child to her special day. Carl, bless his, I can't function without an iPhone in his hand, Hart pulled up the video. I didn't know he had recorded it, but he was able to catch the final, "How dare you bring a ducking child to my wedding?" I lit into them back. So if T's supposed to be there as the flower girl but not be there because she's a child, how am I supposed to pull that off? We went to the fair to calm T down, and so she'd have something happy to remember and hopefully forget that Liz cursed her out. To her face. Mom and Dad went quiet, then apologized. They said that they were going to have a word with Liz when she got back from the honeymoon, and then had a nice chat with T about the things she saw and did. We drove home Sunday morning, and that was that. Story over. Back in the present. T was blown away. Mom, would I be a bad person for unfriending her and blocking her ass? I said no, and we went back to enjoying some mom and daughter time. The next one is an entitled parent story. I haven't seen my since I was 16 and we were in court. So 19 years I haven't had any contact with the mother. She hired a PI to find me, and I still refuse to talk to her. I even have my lawyer send her a formal letter of no contact, and threatened her with a restraining order. She sent this email to me through my work email. I shorten it, but basically it said, to my name, this is her name, your mother. I thought you would have matured by now and came and apologized to me and your father for what you put us through. Because of you, your father lost his teaching career, and we had to sell our house. However, it has come to my knowledge that you own some properties in my area, so it's only right if you give us one of them as an apology. One of my most expensive properties would be a good fit for us. As soon as you hand over the keys to property, we can finally able to start to heal and get past this misunderstanding that you blow out of proportion. I hope you come to the right decision. Her name. I just can't stop laughing at this. Like, no idiot, I'm not giving you anything. This is just another bit of evidence to help me get a restraining order against she. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.